Okay, so welcome back. So in this video, and what I'm gonna do, hopefully every week, is that I'm gonna go through all the things that I've read or learned in the week. Because I usually just read things, write things, and then nothing happens with it. It's that no one ever sees the light of day, all the things that I'm thinking about. I like to be alone for the most part, but it's gotten to the point where I'm bored most of the time, especially after work, because I now work a full-time job. And it's just getting at me, I need to do something. And I figured that I might as well just share what it is I'm doing because everybody else shares things and everyone else shares stupid things. And I don't think the things that I do are, stupid. So that's what's going to happen. So I think what I'll do first is I'll show my notebook here. So I usually never do any note taking on a notebook. All my note taking I do on foolscap paper when I'm reading the book or whatever it is. I'm reading an article or I'm watching an interview or a documentary or something like that. But this is the first time that I've gotten a notebook specifically to jot down my thoughts that occurred during the day. And I'll just show some of the things that I have written here. So, like, if I get an idea for, a topic or something, I'll just write it down. Or if I come across something that isn't directly related to anything that I'm reading at that point in time, I'll put that down. There's also a couple of things here that I write that's like got nothing to do with my military history studies. This one's here are gaming related. We'll come back to that another time. But yeah, I just write down things, bits and pieces that come to my mind, and then put it down here. So, for example, this one here, these are notes that I took down regarding a documentary on P-47s that I didn't go with the intention of like watching this documentary to learn things that was going to be related to my research. Because right now, if you've watched my previous video, I like to do like focus studies. So I get a question or I generate a thesis, a hypothesis, and then just like how it is in university where you are given essay questions or exam questions, I make my own up and then I make my own reading list and then start reading through the list and then try to answer the question, whatever it is that I'm trying to do research on. So in this case here, I didn't go with the intention of like watching this specific documentary that was on YouTube. But as I was watching it, there were a bunch of things that came out, interviews with the pilots that had direct relation to the things that I was doing research in that I didn't know anything about. So I jotted down here and I put the timestamps here so that I can revisit the documentary at a later time when I'm more focused with the specific reason of trying to get the information out of it. So yeah, this is what this notebook is about. This one here, the alt report, this is to do with Vietnam, development of dogfighting in the missile age. I jotted down the pages here. This is a primary source. This was a report done by a US Navy commander during the middle of the Vietnam War. It's related to air-to-air combat tactics. And in here, pages 21 and then 357, this is where the first, how do I explain it? This is basically the creation of Top Gun. That's as simple as I can make it. It's from this report that some dude made during the middle of the Vietnam War. He was doing a tactical analysis on air-to-air combat. On pages 21 and then 357, it's actually larger sections. So I think it's page 21 to 25, then 357 to like 400 or something. It was like, I think it's like 25, 50 pages, starting from this page on. It's basically the creation of Top Gun. It's like this dude, he identifies that the United States Navy needs to develop a more serious training program to redevelop the dogfighting skills, and they need to make a school out of it. It's of course a lot more complex than that, but I'm going to revisit the exact pages here and then go in depth. This one here, I noted down because I was just skimming through the whole report, which was about like 500 pages or so. If you think that's long, wait till you see the other stuff. So yeah, that's what this book is about. This one here, this is what the video topic ideas that I have. So I wrote down a bunch, but I've yet to like make any, except for this one. This one I did make. I made two videos about this, my methods of research and note taking and whatnot. And I've got like a whole bunch of other stuff. There's like everything is all over the place. There's like fighter combat tactics. There's ancient warfare and strategy. There's the dynamics between Eastern and Western philosophies of warfare. There's also naval strategy here and there. There's also a couple more gaming stuff, which not going to be focus for this video. This one here, I'm trying to request from the US Air Force Archives. There's a declassified document called Sabre Measures Charlie, and it's basically a not Korean War, but 1950s report on Second World War air combat statistics. And there's also, I'm pretty sure, a lot of analysis on air combat tactics. It's all on microfilm. So I went online and I looked up like what the hell microfilm is. I generally know what it is because you see it in like movies and whatnot. Like I think the last two films that I've watched where you could see people use microfilms, it was War Games from like 1980, I don't know, 3, 4. It's got Matthew Broderick starring in that film. And then in Stranger Things, a couple of scenes in the earlier seasons, you have the characters go through the library and you see them using microfilms. Sabre Measures Charlie, as far as I know, there is no digital copy. It's declassified, but it's still on microfilm. So I'm trying to get a request for the archives to make the digital copy and give me a copy. Because it's been referenced a couple of times. So people reference this and then they bring out the stats. But when I go looking for it, because I want to see if the stats are real, because the way the quote goes is like there's lies, damn lies, and then there's statistics. You never know if it's actually real. I want to have a look for it for myself. It's still on microfilm, and there's nothing wrong with requesting for it because it's declassified, and it is the job of the archives. If you do requests for things like this for a digital copy, it is their job to do so. So I'm working on that, trying to get that one out. This is what this notebook here is. We'll get on to the things that I've actually been reading. So 2 weeks ago, I finished reading the Memoirs of General Sherman. So this here is about 23 pages of my notes of Sherman's memoirs. His memoirs, the publication that I read was about 600 or so pages long. So here's 23 pages of my notes on his 600-page memoir. I'm not going to go into detail too much because I made a book club, and we picked this as our first book club's book to read. And we were supposed to read it in a month. I did it in about 3 weeks or so, but everybody else couldn't keep up with that, so we've extended it 1 extra month. So I'm not going to go in depth into this just yet, just because I don't want to spoil anything for my friends who will be watching this video. Well, maybe they'll be watching this video. I don't know how long this video is going to be. It's probably going to end up being another long-ass rant, but it is what it is. This was an amazing book. I did not know much about Sherman. All I knew is that when it came to the American Civil War, everyone says that the two guys that carried it to the end was Grant and Sherman. For the most part, Sherman is basically a meme online. It's his March to Georgia, a March to the Sea, his views on warfare, especially total war. It's all been simplified to just memes about just going in and just beating the absolute crap out of the enemy and then be done with it. What I learned, however, was that this man was a genius. His mind for strategic thinking goes way beyond like what I thought Sherman was. I always thought he was more like an operational commander kind of guy. It was not the case at all. He's actually a very poor, well, not very poor, but in terms of like generalship, he's no Alexander or Caesar. He's no Hannibal. tactically speaking, he's not the best general. There's far more better generals that can like win battles and destroy whole armies. No, Sherman's strength lies in his ability to read and understand and correlate politics, culture, society, and strategy, and then actually execute on all this knowledge that he's able to get into his mind and like connect all these different dots and then execute a strategy that is successful. In this case, was very successful. That's where the strengths of Sherman is. He's an incredibly smart dude. Well, we'll go in depth into that another time. So there's that. Now, as I said before in my previous videos, you don't want to just read one book. Ideally, you're starting a topic, you want to read at least 3 on said topic. So here, I didn't read the whole book, I just read the section of it. It's The Soul of Battle by Victor Davis Hanson. It's the second section of 3. He writes about 3 different generals. It's a Theban general, I can't remember what his name, Epaminondas, I think that's how you pronounce it. At least I think it was him. It might have been another one. There's him, there's Sherman, and then there's General Patton from the Second World War. I only read the second section, but I intend to revisit that book and read the other 2 sections. It's about 100 pages or so. And this was great because Victor Davis Hanson, because he is, professional historian, he synthesizes all of his knowledge regarding all of the context of what Sherman did. So like how American society was back then, because remember in Sherman's memoirs you only get from his point of view. Victor Davis Hanson, he gives the other sides that Sherman either is biased against or just doesn't mention at all. Hanson, yeah, he gives all that, and not just cultural, societal categories or topics of Sherman's campaigns. He also does give the operational, strategic, some of the tactical details of how Sherman executed his campaigns. And yeah, you get all of this in this one section, 100 pages or so. I will once again revisit this again. There was a lot of very interesting stuff here, especially with relation to what I would consider like American subcultures, because I'm not an American. I'm from Malaysia. I have a foreigner's perspective on things, and there's a lot of things that it was very interesting regarding American society in the 1860s, which I do want to talk about, and we'll get back to that another time. So that's the main stuff I've been doing this month. For the previous 2 months, however, there's been a very much larger project I've been working on. Basically, it started off as an analysis on the United States Navy fighter doctrine during World War II. And I tried to split it up between the early war and then the late war. So 1941 to 1942, then I was going to do 1943 to 45. What happened with that project is that it expanded to an analysis of air combat tactics from the First World War to Vietnam. How exactly that happened, I'm not too entirely sure. My reading list for this project is almost like 200 sources. So that's 200 books, articles, and primary sources, which I found. Yeah, I don't know. This project is going to take years, man. There's no way around that. But I'll just show what I've done so far. So this is an article on the Red Baron reports. This was a United States Air Force study during, actually, was it during? No, it was after the Vietnam War. So in my previous notes here that I mentioned here, the ALT report, that was the United States Navy's mid-war analysis and recommendations. The Red Baron report is the United States Air Force analysis and recommendations. And they both come to different conclusions. And what I found is that everyone likes to talk about Top Gun and how the United States Navy, after they implemented it in the middle of the war, they then started getting, much better kill ratios and all this and that. What I found is that, especially for this article here, it's not that straightforward, because you have to take into account when you're dealing with statistics, like there's all nuances. You can always manipulate the numbers to prove anything, really, especially in like the modern age today. Every time someone brings up a statistics on CNN or Fox News or whatever nonsense news channel, propaganda channel, You could give the same information to somebody, and they both, you could give the exact same information to two different people, and each person could easily draw conclusions that were in opposite directions. And with the Red Baron reports here, you find some conflicting information. Well, not conflicting, but a different perspective to the Alt report regarding what were the exact strengths and weaknesses of U.S. air power during Vietnam, and the dogfighting. Basically, it goes down to the exact details. The Red Baron reports actually has almost record after action report and an analysis on almost every shoot down in the Vietnam War. So when Phantoms or any kind of aircraft involved in a shoot down air to air in Vietnam, they recorded and they analyzed. And this the actual report, which I do have. I'm pretty sure it's like a couple thousand, 2,000 pages, I think. If you get all the volumes together, that's going to take a long time to go through. But it's really cool because you have like every dogfight that happens. And then in the major dogfights, you have like diagrams that somebody drew out, which like, this is where, this was the context of the operation. And we had a flight of Phantoms here, and then a bunch of MiGs came in and jumped in, and then this is what happened. This guy did this, he turned this way, and he fired a missile here and there. Yeah, it's... I am intending to go through the whole actual primary document. But this article here was only about 10 pages or so. You get the author's point of view pointing out the discrepancies between the U.S. Air Force and the Navy's reports and how they both came to two completely different conclusions. And he actually says that the Air Force at the time actually had the right conclusions, basically, but history remembers it as the Air Force not taking the whole dogfighting thing seriously, and then they suffered serious losses to it, and then that the U.S. Navy was far ahead of its time, and these guys are the heroes. But it doesn't seem to be that straightforward. But I want to see the stuff for myself, and then I'll come to my own conclusions on that. So there's that. There's the Vietnam stuff. I have here sections of another book called Fighters Over the Fleet. I can't remember who wrote it. I only went into this book to read the first 7 chapters or so. First 5 chapters, my bad. This book is interesting because I went into it to learn the early developments from the First World War to the Second World War of air combat tactics. This book, however, most of it, like about 70% of the book, is just focused on the technical details of the development of weapon systems. So we're talking aircraft, radar, missiles, all that kind of stuff. But for the first part of the book, however, the author actually does give the theoretical, strategical, and the philosophical, the doctrinal stuff of warfare. Which isn't the case for the rest of the book, but for the first 5 chapters or so, he actually does give information, and he does provide the sources for at least the British and the American development of the naval air power, how they developed their doctrine, their strategy, and their tactics, and then how they implemented it, and then what happened, and how they adapted it, and dealt with real combat situations. I only got to the 5th chapter. There is a chapter on Vietnam that I'm going to go through, but I've skimmed through it, and it's not that relevant because, once again, it's mainly focused at that point on the technical specifics of jets and weapons. But yeah, I got a lot of information that I was actually looking for regarding doctrine and air combat tactics from this book. I've got about 20 plus pages, and it's only 5 chapters, and this book isn't that long. There's a lot of pictures in it, so even though you read 12 pages, in terms of text, you only really read 5, but it's really, really in-depth. It's really, really dense material, because he doesn't really handhold you regarding this is how it developed in chronological order or this, that, and the other. For the 3rd or 4th chapter, my criticism on that is that he jumps a lot for the past and then the present, and the past and the present, and somewhere in between, all the different characters that were part of the Naval War College, or or engineers and designers or pilots in flight schools and whatnot, how they all were developing. And it's not a straightforward story, basically, because how could it be? It was a time of revolution regarding aviation and its implementations into warfare. So it is pretty hard to keep track if you're not a well experienced reader of military history. This one may be a little bit difficult, but boy, was there a lot to learn from that one. What I didn't really know when I started all this was that the amount of lack of information regarding the Japanese side of Second World War. And there's a lot of good reasons why. Is that one, most of the records or information regarding the Japanese side, that's whether first-hand accounts of battles, their doctrine, their strategy, operations, quite a lot of it's all gone. They just didn't have the records, or they were all burned out during the firebombing campaigns towards the end of the war. And the other side is that all the information that is left and available is all in Japanese. And it is interesting because there's not a lot of people that have taken the time and effort to go into what remaining Japanese archives there are and then get the information from there and then, put together the pieces of what happened on their side. The majority of the Pacific War is written by the Americans, and you only get their point of view for the most part. That's why Shattered Sword, which is said to be the definitive book on the Battle of Midway, not entirely true, because they focus on the Japanese side, which is the strength of it. They went and got from the Japanese archives a lot of information that dispelled a lot of quote-unquote myths about the Battle of Midway. If I were to recommend someone to read about the Battle of Midway, I wouldn't recommend Shattered Sword as the first book. I recommend you read one of the older books, because this is actually pretty good. You can get you can learn a lot, not just about the Battle of Midway, but about historiography regarding war and military operations. Read the traditional books and sources that are mainly American biased. Read that first, and then read Shattered Sword, and then you'll get the whole picture about it, because it's like the fog of war, It's the same with history. As time goes on and people find different sources of information, it's very, very interesting to see how people study history, study warfare, study campaigns and battles, and how the history of said battles change over time because people go and find different things. And it's I'm not explaining it properly, but you learn a lot from just looking at that kind of historical development. So yeah. Where the hell am I? Pacific War, Air Combat Tactics, Doctrine. Yeah, okay. So there's that. Right. So here are a bunch of loose stuff that I've read. I'll try to be short. This one here is a book. Well, it's not actually a book. It's a collection. No, that's not even true either. During the Second World War in the Western theater, this is regarding the air war over Europe. During the war, the 8th Fighter Command issued it wasn't a study per se, but they issued an order that went out to all the different fighter units in the 8th Command. And the whole job of it was just to ask all the veteran pilots that were there, I think about 43 or 44, I think some of them might be been in 45, but I think it was 1943 and 44 that they did this. They sent out an order and said that anybody that's actually any good at doing this stuff, write down all your thoughts on tactics, and we're going to put it all together into a document, and we're going to give that out to everybody so that when the new fighter pilots get into combat, we can give them this manual, and they might be able to learn a thing or two that might, help them out and survive. So this was the document as I understand it now. I think the document as it was published at that time was called The Long Reach by 8th Fighter Command. The copy that I got was a reprinting of it by Osprey Publishing, I think, maybe. I'll try and edit into the video here. I'll put it in the description below, any corrections, major corrections that I need, or the links and the names that I get wrong. But I only took a couple of pages of notes because the whole book itself was every other word had something that was, to me at least, profound in terms of research. It's I didn't know that. I didn't know about that. As like, the descriptions of actual aerial combat over the European theater, it was very eye-opening because it basically kind of dispels everything that normal people know, like especially what I knew at the time. Because the Second World War is thought of as very similar to the First World War, as like the dogfighting era. What I found is that this is not true. Dogfighting as we know it today didn't exist back then. Like you didn't have, at least from the research that I've conducted so far, and I intend to go much deeper into it. What we understand as air combat maneuvering or dogfighting didn't exist until the 1960s. Folks back then, their understanding of air combat, it wasn't to say rudimentary, but it was more, I don't know what the exact type of word, archaic maybe. Let's take, for example, like air combat geometry. One circle fights, two circle fights, so that's the rate and the radius fight. When you have two different fighters that perform differently, you have to take into account like what the turn rate is, but then also what the turn radius is. So these are two different values, and a pilot that understands the differences between these two and understands the differences between, let's say, two competing aircraft, turn rates and the turn radius, you can make maneuvers in a dogfight that will give you an advantage if the opponent doesn't know. Then you also have the energy maneuverability theory. The concept of energy is basically like cornerstone of all air combat tactics right now. The thing is that for the folks that fought World War II, World War I, even the Korean War, the concept of energy was there. They understood the relation between altitude and airspeed. But if you read through the way that they thought about it, they rarely used the term energy. And for the most part, it was only always in relations between altitude and airspeed. For those that look more in depth into energy maneuverability and how it is applied and learned in modern fighters, it goes far beyond just altitude and airspeed and changing kinetic energy to potential energy. Because I've looked into the EM charts and the equations by Boyd regarding the theory and all that. It's very, very in depth, and there's a lot more to just altitude and airspeed, basically, when it comes to energy. But for the Second World War folks, they did not have any of this. To them, it was altitude, airspeed, and then it was the performance of the aircraft, different altitude, what kind of engine performance they could get, what kind of speeds, what kind of turn rates, and depending on the different altitudes you are, due to the density of the air and all that. That's how they thought about it. They didn't have an all-encompassing theory regarding how aircraft competed with each other, and they didn't have what we have now today regarding like air combat geometry. It was very, very rudimentary, and I think it's important. Some people are probably going to be thinking it's like, yeah, okay, they thought about it differently, they had different terms, but if essentially it was the same, wasn't it? Like you're just making it more complex. It's not really, because if you're someone like me, the development of how we got here is just as important as what it is that they're trying to develop or what it is that we can learn from them. It's important to see how it changed. And it's also important to see from what kind of perspective that they developed their ideas from, because they didn't develop it the same way. What we know today as like the modern dogfighting theory wasn't the case back then. And especially if you read this book here regarding fighter tactics in real combat situations over the Second World War, you find that most of it is like not that relevant, really. Like modern dogfighting theory, air combat geometry, energy maneuverability. It's like, it's important to know if you're a fighter pilot to be competent at your trade in that regard. But when it comes to actually fighting the enemy, and you've got like some of the fights here had over 1,000 aircraft in the air, over miles of airspace. When you get into a furball where it's like 100 fighters against 100 fighters, these things don't matter anymore. And then you read this and you find what I would call like squad combat tactics, which is what I found to be the doctrine of Second World War. It's not dogfighting; it was team fighting. when you read the accounts of like individual fighter pilots as well, and especially the aces, they always emphasize that the air combat of the Second World War was a team effort. It wasn't one-on-one dogfights or two-on-two dogfights where they were going into one circle, two circle fights, or trying to get energy advantages on bandit or this, that, yeah. It was always like, here's my flight. This was the orders I gave to the squadron, because they operate on the squadron basis, which isn't that common now because of how developments in weapon systems have evolved since the Second World War. For these guys that fought in the Second World War, it was like mass air battles. You took the whole wing into combat, and there was like 80 dudes on just one single radio channel, and they were gonna go and fight the enemy. And sometimes, a lot of the times, especially for the escort tactics, which is what the long reach is about, it's about the fighter escorts that go in on the raids into Germany. Sometimes you're gonna have to take 8 dudes against 50 dudes. Like the escort's gonna be like AP-51s going up against like 50 to 75 109s coming at the bombers, and that's the fight there. No amount of air combat geometry is going to help you out there. And that's what you get from the accounts here and their tactics and what they focus on a lot. So yeah, this was great. This is notes from an interview that's on YouTube. I'll put the link below again. This is Bud Anderson, who was a triple ace from the Second World War. He flew with Chuck Yeager, who some say is the best pilot to have ever flown in history. This is what they say. He might have more differing opinions, but he says the exact same things that I gathered from my analysis of the long reach. And he actually mentions it in this interview, that the dogfights that everyone talks about today, because Bud Anderson, there's like I think there's about 3 or 4 dogfights that he wrote in his memoirs, and he's talked about it at great detail and length since after the war, of the engagements where he was in like a proper dogfight, right? It was like a 1-on-1, 2-on-1, 4-on-4, and then he goes into detail about like what he did and how the battles were fought. But in this interview, he does mention, after talking about some of those fights, is that those fights were the exceptions. They were not the rule, which is counter to what the general understanding of the Second World War in terms of air-to-air combat is for the general public. The dogfights were rare. And statistically, because I've read other sources, I don't have them here, but it's around about like 80 to 90% of all air-to-air kills, 80 to 90% of all shoot-downs in almost every war, from First World War to, I think, Desert Storm might have been included in that one as well. Basically, 80 to 90% of people who get shot down never see the person who's shooting at them. You can't have a dogfight if you don't know that the guy's behind you. And you get that a lot in researching air-to-air combat tactics in the Second World War. I think the Germans in the Eastern Front, you read their accounts, and there's like very little dogfighting. Or if there is dogfighting, it's not the kind of dogfighting that we know today in modern theory. They did some wild things where fights might last like half an hour or something to that respect. But we will revisit that again, because that's going to take a couple of years to go through. So yeah, Wing Leader by James Edgar Johnson, the leading Spitfire ace of the Second World War. This is his memoirs. He wrote another book called Full Circle, which is like a historical and tactical analysis of actual air combat tactics from the First World War to the Korean War. I intend to read that. But this book, once again, massive insight into fighter operations in the Second World War. This one here, because he was a wing commander, like I said before in the long reach of 8th Fighter Command, he was in command of the whole wing. So that's like 3 squadrons of fighters. And he gives the tactical details of like how it is to be a wing commander in a combat situation, how you coordinate, communicate, and then, fight the battle with like somewhere up to like 60 to 80 dudes all under your command. This was amazing. There's a lot of fights here. That's like on what I would consider like the operational level, basically, which is very rarely talked about. And he goes in depth into a lot of like the team fighting tactics of the Second World War. There's very, very little in here in his account regarding like dogfighting. And that was really interesting because he's a Spitfire ace. And the way that, as I said before, the understanding that the general public has regarding this era of air combat, everyone just thinks it's just about the dogfights, but it's not. That was the exception, not the rules. Moving on, so I have here the Wildcat Aces of the Second World War. I read this book trying to look for information regarding doctrinal developments during the early years of the United States Navy. I did find quite a lot, especially with how the U.S. Navy did their training and how their training compared to not only their Japanese counterparts, but also all the other air forces, which I also found a lot of things which go counterintuitive to how the narratives today, modern narratives are regarding air combat in the Second World War. There's a lot of things that just isn't quite true or is a misconception. Get to that another time. This book was interesting, The Ace Factor by Mike Spick. This is more of a book for air combat enthusiasts. It's not like a really academic type of book, and it's not a memoir, but it had a lot of information and ideas that I never truly quite considered. And it basically is a book about situational awareness. He has a lot of stats, and this was the book where I found Sabre Measures Charlie. It was the first book that I found with a reference to that document, and it's the core document that Spick uses to make his arguments in this book. But there were a lot of things regarding pilots themselves and the way they thought, decision-making processes, and sort of the cultural aspects of fighter pilots and how that determines outcomes of battles. Is a very, very different book from all the rest. Yeah, I'll go in depth into this another time. But yeah, that was cool. I had a friend in my War Thunder squadron. He actually met a Sabre pilot that flew Sabres in the 50s, but he never saw combat. And I asked him, I gave him a bunch of questions to ask this pilot his experience, because for the first time ever, I found a primary source on my own that no one else ever had. So I tried to pitch the questions regarding because I was still trying to learn, because the 1950s is very important to my project, because this is the time where it's the last period where air combat is supposedly going from dogfighting to the modern theory of energy maneuverability and air combat geometry. And I just wanted to see if a dude who did that, who was in this time period, if it was true, how did you guys learn dogfighting? And for the most part, it seems to confirm my current thesis that the development of dogfighting and air combat tactics is very different from what we like to think it is. It's very, very rudimentary and not really. I need to find better words than archaic, but yeah, it was very different. That's all I would say about that. It was more team oriented than it was individual dogfighting. No, this one was more random stuff. This folder here is actually on a battle called Delium during the Peloponnesian War. I basically have all the information that I ever wanted on it to make a video. So basically, this is a video that should already have been made, but I haven't made it yet because there was a final part of it that I wasn't quite too happy with regarding the research on it. But we'll get to that. This one is basically the development of Western tactics, all of Western tactics. You can trace the lineage to this one battle where it basically all began, for the West at least. Yeah, it's a very interesting story. And once again, I'm just looking at the development of things. We'll come back to this another time. But yeah, that's all the stuff that I've been doing for this month and the last 2 months. Books that I currently have. This is the book that I'm currently reading. Clashes, air combat over North Vietnam during the first part of the war. Actually, no, this was pretty much the entire war, because the Americans get out in 72, 75. They start pulling out. I need to reread the dates regarding that. This is always cited as one of the primary sources for all of the other books and information and articles that I read about the Vietnam era. This book always gets referenced, and there's a lot of like really good information here. There's a lot of things that I didn't know about all in here. We'll go over that another time, maybe in a couple of weeks or so. This is a primary, well, the book itself is not a primary source, but this book is a collection of primary sources. These are all publications by the Royal Air Force from the First World War to the Second World War. And these are they're not training manuals per se, but they are manuals. These are the publications within the Air Force that they would give to fighter pilots regarding the advanced stuff. This isn't about how to fly, this is how to fight. And you get all that here. And once again, I was looking through these to try find out whether or not fighter combat tactics was anywhere even remotely similar to what we think it was. But like I said, it really isn't. Most of this stuff, you won't find air combat geometry or energy maneuverability or any of that, because that's all modern developments. And the way, like I said, once again, the way that they approach air combat, if at face value, it looks the same in terms of like energy, changing altitude, airspeed, and vice versa. But it's not really. Like I said, the details count. The details matter, and you can kind of tell from the way that they write about it here. Their understanding of air combat was a little bit different from what it's. I think I've repeated that statement about 20 times right now, but I will go through some of these documents at a later date. But yeah, we'll go through that. So yeah, that's my update for this week. I think I'll make one of these every week and see what happens. Maybe every 2 weeks. Maybe that would be better.